Thank you, Jenny. That genuinely was overly generous. My friend Larry Summers often says after such introductions that it's too bad my parents weren't here. My father would have liked hearing it. My mother would have believed it. It's a genuine honor to have all of you here. Many of you, most of you, have traveled very great distances to be with us here today and these last few days, and I am really, really pleased that we have the opportunity to learn from each other. This is an absolutely centrally important idea, and my particular thanks to the Ash Institute and particularly Gore Risby, who I'll come back to at the end, for the leadership that of pulling you all together so that we could learn from each other. I especially, one of the things that I'm especially thrilled about here is the strong international component. One of the great joys of being Dean of the Harvard Kennedy School is the opportunity to travel and learn in so many places. I literally got back at 9 p.m. last night from China, where, as always, remarkable things are going on. And it is, I think, one of the important opportunities, and something I'll mention again, is that to learn from each other, for there is far more going on than people realize. By the way, there's almost not a week that doesn't go by that someone doesn't come to me at the Kennedy School and say, we want to create a Kennedy School or a school of public policy or whatever in their country or their place and so forth. What can we do to make it happen? And I regard this as a very good sign. Indeed, I think this is an exceptionally important time for all the reasons that you all know. The challenges we face are enormous. And you think about the challenges out there ranging from climate change to social policy and education to health. The economy looks like it's not in the world's greatest shape right now, and dozens of other things. And you really do wonder whether there's even a chance that we can meet these challenges. What's interesting, though, is we're in a very different place than maybe 20 years ago or so, especially in this country, but around the world, because a lot of the time has been spent saying the problem is government. The problem itself is government, and if government would just get out of the way and let the private sector take over, things would be wonderful. And indeed, in this country, when Ronald Reagan was president, but even the Washington Consensus view of development and so forth, had this aspect that the primary problem was government was in the way too much. And there's some truth to that, but I want to come back to it. Now, no one says that anymore. It's almost unknown that people simply say, gee, we just get government out of the way, everything will be fine. So that's no longer the way people talk about it. There's also a very exciting moment because young people are so interested in giving back. I see this everywhere. The quality of people that are interested in being involved in something, in responding to John F. Kennedy's old famous quote, our namesake at our school, ask not what you can do, ask what you can do. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. By the way, there was a second part of that. John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And then, literally the next line is, and my fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but ask what we can do together for the freedom of mankind. And in some ways, I think that second comment is even more pertinent now as we think about the challenges that are out there. So the good news is enormous sense that we desperately need, effective governance structures and an excitement among young people to contribute and participate in many places around the world. On the other hand, when you look at the challenges out there and how much we're doing, it is discouraging. We have a project here at the Kennedy School that's called Acting in Time. And it's focused on this question that you think about really big challenges. You can see them coming. Everybody knows they're there. And yet, for whatever reason, we're unwilling or unable to act on those. And let me just take a couple of obvious examples. One is the issue that is widely talked about now, but it's climate change. Everybody can see it. I mean, it's really dramatic in most of our nations, everything from ice packs that are melting or storms that are becoming more dramatic. And Yet we really have made almost no real progress in terms of reducing carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. Indeed, by almost every measure, when people project what the expected case would be, we always do we do worse, not better. And there are many reasons for this. Many of them start here in the United States. But there are huge challenges ahead going forward. It's something we were talking a lot about in China. Another example, though, demographic change. Demographic changes in the developed world are remarkable, but even in the developing world, where we've gone from a place where we had more than 2 children per woman, oftentimes many more, to well less than 2 children per woman. In Japan, for example, 1.3 children per woman over her lifetime. By the way, if you're weak on biology, there's an important reason why 2 is a magic number. It sort of takes 2 to tango. If that's complicated, you can afterwards talk to one of the other people at the conference and they can maybe explain why 2 is the magic number. But it means that if your birth rate, for example, is 1 child per woman, it means your population halves every generation. And there are parts of China, there are large parts of Japan, there are parts of Western Europe, and elsewhere around the world where the numbers are like 1.3. And again, it isn't just once. It isn't that you have it once. It keeps going until you get back up to 2. And there are lots of reasons why those things are going on. But that's also related to something else. It involves immigration. Because as developed world has fewer and fewer people, then the developing world often will be sending people. And that has consequences, both good and bad, for both the sending and the receiving society. Just in some ways, as in the previous century, much of the mobility talked about across nations involved economics, meaning capital, financial capital. I think this century will be much more about the mobility of people. And it turns out people aren't quite as simple as dollar bills. They tend to bring with them a whole set of values and opportunities and needs and challenges. But there are dozens of others, ranging from calamities associated with natural disasters to questions involving potential health risks of catastrophic nature, such as bird flu. So on the one hand, there's the acting, we look and see on many of these things, it's very obvious that the challenges are out there and we're not doing very much. Now, let me go back to these good news and talk a little bit about the challenges and a few thoughts. But the truth is, I'm here to learn from all of you, and we're all here to learn together. I certainly don't pretend to have a great deal to offer to all of you. First of all, while on the one hand nobody is saying government is the primary problem too often, certainly failures of government are often seen as part of the problem, and you know the list. But corruption is widely talked about, and there's 2 levels of corruption. There's one level of corruption which is what I would call the sort of classic petty corruption, where someone is paid money to do or not do something, and that leads to all kinds of challenges. And this is something that's common throughout the world, especially common in settings where governance is weakly formed. But in many respects, the kind of corruption that comes from in fact normal interactions whereby powerful moneyed interests end up having enormous power and control over governance structures. That corruption is much more dangerous and much harder to cope with. And that is something we see all over. We certainly see it in most democratic systems as well as non-other. The second one is what I would say the bureaucratic culture. I spent time in government. I've had 2 jobs that I thought were the greatest jobs of all time. One was my time in government. The other is a job I have right now. I don't know what I'm going to do after this. It's pretty much peaked. But the striking thing is how bureaucratic government remains in so many settings. All the innovations that you've tried to do, oftentimes it's in spite of government, not because of government, that you've been able to do it. Most real entrepreneurs around governance get as frustrated with government as small businesses get with government, and it is a striking thing. And one of the things that I think is most disturbing is the risk aversion that comes with bureaucratic systems. There is so little incentive to take a chance, to do something bold. And I saw it over and over again in my own service, and I see it again and again other times. The one worst thing that can happen to you is you can be the lead story in the national news. And the only way you can do that in government is by doing something bad. Okay? For me, it was when, the first day when an administration official admits. Okay? That means what you said is, look, we're taking this, and that, when I was the front page of the New York Times, not a good day, I had a long discussion with the reporter, and I said, look, we're taking this really innovative set of ideas around welfare reform, and there's some risks associated with it. I can't be sure how it's going to go out in this way. This is why we're doing it, this is why it makes the most sense, and so forth. And the lead story was administration official admits. And all the risks and bad things I mentioned managed to get into the story way early. And down at the back were the good things. And any of us that have spent time in government have experienced that. And the sort of risk aversion that comes with that is fantastic. The third big challenge has to do with jurisdictional boundaries and jurisdictional fiefdoms. As you all know also, one of the great challenges is trying to solve a problem that crosses, heaven forbid, more than one jurisdictional group. That kind of situation is, when it crosses both levels of government, boundaries within government, and heaven forbid goes across nations, the notion of solving those problems becomes almost impossible. And yet most of the difficult problems we face have that characteristic. They, by definition, have to cross those boundaries, and yet government is often unwilling to do that. And as a result of this, maybe these are partly the failures or maybe they're partly the results, we obviously see government in a position where it often just simply does not understand what's really happening on the ground. Doesn't understand what's going on with people, doesn't understand what's going on with business, and gets into a business as usual mentality. It's narrow-minded, it's often indifferent, it generally feels quite arrogant. A minor anecdote, but just is one of those things that still bothers me. When I was actually in Washington, working very, very hard, I went to get my driver's license changed from Cambridge, from Massachusetts to Maryland. And I got there and I didn't have enough, after waiting in line for like 2 hours, and I, by the way, had to stand the entire time because they didn't have this clever idea of you take a number and sit down, which is a really interesting innovation. So after standing in line for 2 hours, I, of course, discovered I only had 2 forms of identification, not 3. And so I would have to come again the next week and stand in line for 2 more hours or 3 more hours in order to get my driver's license changed. But annoying as that was, what was far more stunning was the following little incident. There was an elderly woman who had just come in from a driver's test. And what had happened is in Maryland, when you get elderly, you have to take a driving test again to get your license renewed for the obvious reason that there's some concern that people's capacity to drive has worsened as they've gotten older. And she'd failed the test. And so she was very upset because she didn't know how she'd get home. And of course, a car is incredibly important to you, especially as you get older. And she was terribly, terribly upset. And she was, kind of sobbing and so forth. And then said, okay, well, that I feel terrible about that. And she was getting over it and then said, so could you at least give me an ID, an identification, a government-issued ID, because, of course, I no longer have my driver's license. And they said, no, we can't. You don't have a valid driver's license. This is an absolutely true story. And this lady, I was literally due to go to the National Governors Association meeting the next day. I said, I really hope I don't meet the governor of Maryland because I will go crazy. But that's what we're dealing with, and you know what it's like. So, she literally walked out of there without an ID. And she said, go find your birth certificate. This is someone who's 85 years old, go find your birth certificate. It was unbelievable. So that's on the one hand a challenge. There's the second challenge. We have unbelievably motivated young people, but in country after country, we have a different problem. which is the rewards, the financial rewards associated with going into government versus other occupations, notably business, are hugely different and growing. In the United States, 20 years ago, if you graduated from Harvard Business School and you graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School, you could expect to get maybe 20%, 25% more in your first job if you kind of went into a business consulting job versus government. Now you can expect to make 2 or 3 times as much money. That doesn't count the bonus, it doesn't count stock options, it doesn't count all those things, and that's just the first year. And the same is true in law. And when I look and see what happens to people that come to the Harvard Kennedy School, these are people that are highly motivated to do public service in one form or another. If you ask those who graduate, a lot of them are taking on lots of debt. And the people that leave the Harvard Kennedy School with 0 debt, 95% go into government or NGO, civil society kinds of activities, 95%. Those who graduate with $90,000 in debt, 45% go in. And by the way, the median debt right now is $70,000. That's from college as well as graduate school. So for me, this strikes at the very heart of my capacity to do the job if we can't find a way to lower the cost of education. So there are many, many other examples I could give, but the challenge here, there's one other, by the way. People that consider going to government feel like if they're really good, if they're really motivated, if they are the very best, they will go up just as fast as someone that isn't very good, who isn't very motivated, who isn't very energetic, because of civil society systems, civil service systems. Now that's not always true, but that's how it feels, and at its worst, that is true. So where do we go from here? First of all, we go to all of you. You are the innovators. You're the ones to listen to. You're the ones to learn from. And so thank you. We're going to take your lessons and we're going to try and teach the next generation of students, the next generation of leaders, and hopefully share these ideas broadly. But when I look at places that get me excited, I would point to at least a few. First, the most interesting innovations I see cross boundaries. And they use those boundaries instead of being a problem, but to be an advantage. So those that cross the boundaries between business, government, and civil society, those, first of all, the problems cross those boundaries. Think about climate change. It's clearly got to cross business, government, civil society. Without government action, business will not change. But if you do it wrong, business will rebel. And so working across those boundaries are vital. Social entrepreneurship, those kinds of unusual, exciting, innovative ideas. It's why at the Kennedy School now we're doing a genuinely joint degree program where you can get both a business school master's and a Kennedy School master's together. And the goal here is not just that people get both, but that both institutions will learn from each other. I talk about it as a benevolent virus that will infect both institutions, and it's one of the most exciting things we have going on. But social entrepreneurship, all of those kinds of activities are related. So number one. Number two, things like this, international exposure to ideas. I cannot tell you how humbling it is to be the dean here and to travel to so many different countries and realize how much better one or another country does one or another thing. And the humility is believe me, if you're at Harvard, learning humility is a difficult thing. But it is precisely that. And I hope as you learn from each other, you'll help us learn how to share those lessons. We ourselves have students from 86 different countries, 46% of our student body is international. But the chance to really understand and learn and grow, not to adapt, not to say, gee, it works well in Guatemala, let's try it over here in Afghanistan. I don't think those kinds of, but I think the ideas and the openness and the willingness to think about those things. One of the things we discover, for example, we do a lot of short-term executive education training programs. We have different kinds. One are ones where people all come together, typically in Cambridge, although sometimes in other countries, from different countries. And we teach about management and leadership and innovation and sometimes specific policy topics. And then we have other programs that are done strictly within one country, often on site. The difference in terms of what we're able to teach and how much the students learn and how open they are to new ideas is enormous. If we do an on-country, in-site program, it's often the case that people are just resistant to hearing about and thinking about new ideas. Whereas if they're surrounded by people from other places, almost by definition, you have to listen and learn and innovate. And so, again, that I think is vital. And the last point, coupling innovation with accountability. You know, the great challenge of government at the end of the day is you are accountable to an astonishing array of people. And saying that we shouldn't be accountable doesn't work. So finding a way to say, really, I am willing to be more accountable if you will give me more flexibility. That seems to me when you have real opportunities for growth. Because there's just no way we can sort of say, just get off my back, whatever else. Oftentimes, government becomes so accountable, that's when you send it off to the private sector and we'll just pay for it elsewhere. But that's not the idea. The idea is to find accountability to go with innovation. So all of these good qualities are vital. I think you have much more to say than I do. I want to take a question or two, but before I do, I want to comment on Gore Rizvi. Gore, who's sitting right over there, as many of you know, is moving on after launching the Ash Institute for Innovation and Governance. And you look around here, all of you, and the kinds of things that have been gone, it's really directly due to Gore's extraordinary leadership. He has I'm tempted to say enough said, but I'm going to say one or two more words. He came in with an ill-formed idea that's something to do with innovation, something to do with governance, something to do with a domestically oriented program. And as
our ill-formed idea, not his.
Yeah, not his, by the way. I'm sorry. He was given an ill-formed idea and said, of course it's a great idea, you can make it work. But both the combination of vision and perseverance and openness that I think characterizes all of your innovations has characterized Gore's performance in this innovation here at Harvard and more broadly. And all who come after will stand on the shoulders of a giant. So again, Gore, my enormous gratitude and thank you for here, but also I think around the world. So with that, let me open up for a couple quick minutes for questions or comments. And my only again, I'm right now on China time still, so it's 2:30 in the morning. So if my answer makes no sense, just cut me a little slack. But with that, any questions or suggestions or thoughts?